Now, in a major policy U-turn squeezed in on Christmas Eve, the government announced this morning that it will raise the inheritance tax relief threshold for farmers, an announcement that the NFU has praised as a huge relief to many. Now, from April, the threshold is set to be increased to £2.5 million, which is being risen from the £1 million that was initially proposed. So that means that spouses or civil partners with estates of up to £5 million between them will pay no inheritance tax on top of existing allowances. Now, here is what the Environment Secretary, Emma Reynolds, had to say earlier on today.
So we've listened to farmers and businesses across the country, and we want to protect more family farms and businesses. So we're announcing today that we're increasing the inheritance tax threshold for individuals from £1 million to £2.5 million. So that means a couple with an estate worth up to £5 million will pay no inheritance tax when they pass on their estate to the next generation.
Well, this announcement follows months of rather loud protests as farmers defied bans to drive tractors to Westminster. At a Commons committee last week, the Prime Minister acknowledged the pressure this policy had put on the farming community.
Is the Prime Minister aware that some farmers who have terminal diagnosis now are actively planning to expedite their own deaths so they hit before April? Is he aware of that?
I've had discussions with a number of individuals who've drawn all manner of things to my attention.
Well, joining me now is the President of the National Farmers Union, Tom Bradshaw. Tom, thank you so much for coming in this evening.
Good evening.
And tell me, when did you find out about this policy reversal?
Well, we knew that there were talks that things might be changing, but officially it was this morning when it became clear that there was definitely going to be change. And as I think you alluded to there, there's a sense of relief across the farming industry because so many farming families couldn't plan their way through this with only £1 million threshold. And so now the cumulative changes with the spousal transfer, which was brought in at the budget at the end of November, and the raising of the threshold from 1 million to 2.5 million means that when the government said they were going to protect the working family farm, many family farms are now going to pay a lot less tax than they were previously. So it is something that we welcome the change. It's never easy recognising when something's wrong, and eventually, after 14 months of long campaigning, we've got to this position today.
Why do you think it's taken those 14 months? Because the level of opposition was put up right from the very start. Not much has changed, really, in terms of the position of farmers and the position that the government is in. I mean, they're branding this move as a response to consultation, but is it really just a U-turn in the face of a bit of a panic?
No, I think that if you go back to the autumn budget when there was an opportunity to change, so autumn 25 budget, they made a minor change, which for those people who'd already lost a spouse is actually significant, and we shouldn't belittle the change that came there. But after then, Labour backbenchers really started to find their voice. They'd been working and meeting with farms across their constituencies. There's over 100 rural Labour MPs now. Now, those rural seats really matter to the party in government. And I think they started to raise their voices as they understood more about the consequences of this policy, particularly what we've called the anti-forestalling clause, which meant that although the changes didn't come into force until April 2026, effectively they'd come into force from the moment that it was changed in the October 2024 budget. So that if anybody transferred land after that date and lived beyond April 2026, but didn't live for 7 years, they were going to have an awful tax burden. And that anti-forestalling clause had trapped the elderly and the terminally ill with no ability to plan. And it was something that Labour MPs were clearly really struggling to defend within their constituencies. And I think that it was the pressure from them, the concerted effort from the farming industry and NFU members building that backbench support, opposition parties who've all committed to overturning the tax. Eventually, the Prime Minister, Secretary of State Emma Reynolds recognised that they could not defend the policy and that they had made a mistake and they had to change that threshold.
Using the internet without a VPN, a virtual private network, is a bit like taking to the road without car insurance. All it takes is one unlucky moment to cost you a lot of cash. This video's sponsor is Private Internet Access. They are the VPN to help keep you safe. Click the link in the description below to find out why over 30 million people have downloaded PIA to protect themselves online. A virtual private network is an app that hides your IP address and helps keep your data private. When you're browsing the internet at home, you give up a large amount of data to businesses, to shops, and indeed to social media giants too. Hackers have the ability to steal your personal data with ease, including sensitive information such as passwords, keystrokes, and even your personal photos. Private internet access helps protect your personal data by encrypting your internet connection to keep your data out of the hands of cyber criminals. And it's not just hackers either to be concerned about. Information can be censored too. When Canada passed their C18 bill, social media giants decided to ban news content on their platforms. But PIA can protect your ability to consume the news and content you love. Private internet access is available for Windows users, Mac OS, Android, Linux, iOS, and you can use one PIA subscription to protect an unlimited amount of devices. And we've got a huge GB News discount for you too. Click the link in this video's description and you'll get a massive 83% off PIA. That's under £2 a month, the price of a coffee, and you'll get an extra 4 months completely free on top. Also, there's a 30-day money-back guarantee too. Visit piavpn.com/GB News to start protecting yourself digitally today.
And that political threat to Labour, through their rural MPs and the front bench as well, exemplified perhaps by that interaction you saw at the liaison committee with the Prime Minister being asked directly about farmer suicide, an extremely bleak reality to be faced with. When you met with the Prime Minister 10 days ago, did you raise that element with him as well?
It was absolutely the human impact of the policy that I raised with Emma Reynolds immediately after the budget, and welcomed the small change that had come, but just said, look, we're still dealing with this harsh reality. It's terrible to think that a tax change could put farmers in that position. But I said, we're still dealing with this consequence, so the change does not go far enough. And then in the meeting with the Prime Minister, Emma Reynolds was also there, and we talked about the human impact of the policy. That group of people, the post-Second World War generation that helped get this country back on its feet, had worked all their lives to be able to pass their farm over to the next generation and risked having it taken away from them at the 11th hour. That's not a fair policy. It's not a well-targeted policy. And that's why the change was so important. And that change has finally come today.
And what do you think has affected this move in so far as ministerial positions? You've had a change in Secretary of State to be engaging with. Did that have an impact in your engagement with Labour on this issue?
I mean, Steve Reid and I, as the previous Secretary of State, had a very professional working relationship. Out of the most challenging circumstance after the autumn budget last year, we had to have some very honest and frank conversations, and we've had those conversations. But obviously, Steve is now moved on, and Emma Reynolds has come in with that Treasury link, that understanding of the economics and the way Treasury works, and I believe she's been pretty instrumental in pushing this change.
So she had a better impact on putting forward the human view, as you put it, of farmers to the government and getting this change turned around, perhaps?
Well, the change has come under Emma's watch with the Prime Minister, and they were the two that I met with 10 days ago. So I do believe that both of them deserve some recognition. It's never easy backtracking on a policy, but recognising it's wrong and that there is that group of people trapped is something that deserves some credit.
Your former president, Baroness Batters, said that the sector is bewildered and frightened of what might lie ahead. I'm sure there's a sense of reassurance from this change today. But what more steps do you think the government needs to take to reassure farmers with this, perhaps olive branch towards re-engaging with that relationship? So
I think those rural Labour constituents are so important now. They've raised their voices. They're now a significant constituency within the Labour Party, and they have a voice that has been listened to finally on this policy. So this is a starting point, but it's certainly not the end. We need trade policy that is really going to uphold our high standards of animal health and welfare. We had the Animal Health and Welfare Bill yesterday, which suggests we're going to increase our standards even further. Now, farmers are up for that challenge, but only if trade policy makes it illegal to bring in food which is produced to lower standards. Otherwise, we're simply exporting our industry. We need a planning system that works. We've got over £1 billion of investment into poultry sheds on hold at the moment because the planning system does not function. That means we're importing more poultry from Poland and the Ukraine, produced to lower standards. Not acceptable. So there's lots that the government can work on. Many elements of that will be contained within the Batters review. It's stuff that we've been asking for since our NFU conference back in February with our blueprints. We need investment in reservoirs. We need investment in new infrastructure, slurry stores, poultry sheds, pig production facilities. All that investment will underpin the food security of this country for the next decade and beyond. And with 70 million people living on an island, when I look around the world at the moment, it feels pretty volatile. Bring in climate change as well. I believe we need a plan for how we're going to feed the country for the next decade and beyond. And that's what we need to work on with the government in 2026.
And just finally, Tom, have you spoken to Marcus Campbell-Savers, the Labour MP who rebelled on this and actually had the whip removed from him as he voted against the government's plans? Have you interacted with him today at all?
Not today. I've been in direct contact with him. He has been referenced on an interview, and I hope that the Labour Party find a way of forgiving Marcus. He raised his voice because he was so principled about this policy. And given that the change has now come, one would like to think that he has a route back into the Labour Party.
You say he might have voted against government policy. Perhaps he was clairvoyant. He saw it coming within a month, and perhaps you want him to be welcomed back into the fold.
Well, I just think he's done the right thing by his constituents, and that's what these Labour MPs have been doing. Those 30 plus that abstained in the vote, Marcus voted against, and they all deserve some real credit from the farming community for being willing to put their head above the parapet. Without those Labour MPs, this change would not have been possible. But they've only understood the consequences because of the engagement they've had with the farming community and members right the way across the United Kingdom.
OK, NFU President Tom Bradshaw, thank you very much for your time this evening. And let's bring in the panel now, shall we? The former Conservative MP and Minister Sir Ranil Jayawardena, and the journalist and former Press Secretary to Paddy Ashdown, Joe Phillips. Good evening to you both. You just heard Tom there talking about it was the backbench Labour MPs leading to this change. Joe Phillips, not the first time that's happened recently. He's battling with his backbenchers quite a lot at the moment.
Yes, yes, he is. But first of all, I would actually pay tribute to Tom because, it's never easy to get to this stage, and it does require, on both sides, an enormous amount of pragmatism, an enormous amount of patience, and an enormous amount of, sticking to it. But I think the point that Tom makes is really important. Those rural MPs, many of whom wouldn't have necessarily come from a rural background, are suddenly realising that there is such a thing as rural poverty. There is such a thing as, lack of access to transport, access for kids to do things, all of those issues, no broadband. And, for anybody who's out shopping over today and tomorrow, when you look at the price of carrots for 15p a bag or Brussels sprouts, spare a thought for the farmers and the work that has gone into growing those. And I would just say that food security, as Tom said, has got to be as important as defence security.
It's a good point there, isn't it, from Joe Ranil. A couple of weeks ago I was in Devon and I was speaking to a European businessman who told me that in Britain food is just too cheap. You heard about how the vegetables going for pennies at the moment. Farmers take on enormous sacrifices to feed this country, don't they?
Absolutely, and food security is going to become an even greater challenge as we face a more uncertain world. I think supermarkets have used their buying power to put lots of pressure on farmers and others for far too long, and consumers, of course, can vote with their feet to make sure that their views are heard. But I think this particular announcement today is a huge U-turn from the government, and it's important that they go further now because it's not over. There are many businesses who are still going to suffer.
It's the way they've done it that I think might concern some farmers, though, because they have snuck it out over Christmas,
Absolutely.
haven't they? I mean, we heard of the announcement just before midday. That clip you saw of Emma Reynolds, we didn't have time to put a question to her, shared by all the broadcasters. Yeah. So they were really cutting it fine there. What does that mean?
It's as if they're embarrassed by the fact that they've had to U-turn. It's almost as if they're embarrassed by the fact that they're having to now defend, or now they're having to reveal that they were defending the indefensible. And, only one Labour MP actually voted against this, of course. So, a lot of Labour MPs were happy to go through the lobbies, vote for this, and it's going to cause a lot of embarrassment for a lot of them.
But they have to bring
at the
it
same
out
time
now
as having
because they've
done the
got
right
to make
thing.
a change to the finance bill. for January. So they had to bring it out. That's why it was done.
No. You can amend any piece of legislation at any point as you take it through Parliament. So that's just another government excuse, and it's part of a sorry list of poor excuses through this entire process.
The bottom line is it was a daft policy to start
Absolutely.
with. And they didn't think it through, they didn't listen, and, for the amount of money it was going to raise...
Well, yes. Well, that's another question, isn't it? Where are they going to find that new hole in the budget?
Well, look at the triple lock, for instance. Look at all the money that's disappeared into pockets of people over COVID. That, recouping the money that was fraudulently stolen from British people during COVID, that unit has just quietly disintegrated.
There's more work to be done there on enforcement, of course, but this will be another headache for the Treasury, and they've lost so many battles now on these measures they want to bring in to bring down the deficit.
It's like anything, Charlie. You need to stop and think it through and think, is it worth it? And it certainly wasn't worth it for the pain for the farmers and rural communities, the gain that the Treasury might have made.
OK, Jo Rannell and Tom Bradshaw, thank you very much for your time